morning, everyone. Welcome to the National D-Day Memorial virtually. My name is Maggie, and I am very excited that you guys have joined us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about the new normal, as I like to call it, what life was like in the 1940s. And if you've seen some of our Facebook posts, we are going to tie it in a little bit to what's going on today. But, you know, I'm very excited you guys have joined us. We're going to do a lot of interactive components to this. We have a few poll questions that are going to come up and pop up on your screen, so please participate. This is a very interactive program. I want to hear what you guys are doing, what you guys are thinking, and we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end too. If you haven't already, go into the chat feature and just let us know where you're watching from today. It's really cool to see how we're all still able to connect despite what's going on in the United States at this time. Now, let's jump into our first poll question for today. So do you think that what is happening today has similarities to life in the 1930s and 1940s? So that poll question should be popping up on your screen in just a second. We will take a few seconds to get some answers back, and we'll talk about them shortly. So I believe the answers are either yes, no, or unsure. If you're watching with multiple people, you can only put in one answer. So try to come to a consensus, talk it out amongst each other, and let us know what you guys are thinking. So are we starting to get some answers in, Lindsay? Perfect. Awesome. So we have about half of the people who are watching have responded so far. So we'll show those results in just a second, because I'm curious to know too. I'll give you my thoughts in a second, of course. It's the whole point of this program, right? Are we still waiting on a few people, Lindsay?
Like 6 people.
Yeah.
We'll wait. Maybe a few more seconds.
We'll give you guys a few more seconds. Put those answers in. We'll talk about them. Okay.
All right, you got them.
Perfect.
So the majority is at 57 or 60% yes.
Okay.
Then we have 27% no.
Okay.
And 19 unsure.
Okay, so it seems like there's a good split between no and unsure, with the majority of people saying yes. So just to give you guys my opinion on this, I asked this question just because I know I connected a few things. We'll talk more about those in a bit. I'd say somewhat. Now, they're not exactly identical situations. Today, we're looking at a public health pandemic. In the 1930s, you're talking about the Great Depression. In the 1940s, you're talking about World War II. Those are very different things than what's happening right now. However, there are some similarities. So we'll really start diving into that now. So the start of the new normal. So in World War II, really that start for the United States was Pearl Harbor. That really changed everything for the US during the 1940s. Now for us today, it was the coronavirus, the stay-at-home orders, being told to wear our masks. That really did start changing how we live our lives. And so what we're going to be doing is really looking at mostly World War II with a few comparisons to today. Let's dig in, because it didn't really fully start with Pearl Harbor. There were some things that influenced how life would change during this time that occurred right before then. The first one is going to be World War I. So this was 1914 to 1918. A lot of you guys, when you think about World War I, you may think of the trenches, especially in France. This was called the War to End All Wars. And there was over 16 million people who were killed during this war. This included civilians and soldiers. To give you guys some perspective, these are going to be the fathers of many of the men who would go and fight in World War II. So they had seen such horrible war and didn't necessarily want their sons to experience that. So remember that as we move towards the 1940s. Now we also had the Great Depression that occurred in the 1930s, 1929 to 1939 to be exact. A few of the things that you saw, consumer spending dropped. We're kind of seeing a little bit of that today, not necessarily to the extreme that we saw it with the Great Depression. It's one of the reasons why the government issued these stimulus checks to try to get the economy going again, to get people spending again. The industrial output declines. To give you guys some perspective, we're not necessarily seeing that right now. You're seeing an industrial shift more like what we saw with World War II, where places that would make rubber goods for home are now making gas masks. Today we're seeing places that would normally make clothing make face masks. So, and then also half of the US banks failed. And one of the things I really want to focus on is the unemployment aspect. Here in this photo, you actually see a line of unemployed men at a food bank in Washington, DC. When you look at pictures of the Great Depression, most of them involve the unemployed or those who've been forced out of their homes. The Great Depression was absolutely horrible. It wrecked our economy, it wrecked the world's economy. It was really hard to bounce back from. Eventually we did, but I do want to make a quick comparison of unemployment. So this was on Thursday when I created this slide. We're now up to 22 million people who are unemployed in the United States right now. Keep in mind, I said 15 million for the Great Depression. So how does today's unemployment rate compare to the Great Depression? So the population in 1932 was 124.8 million, which meant that was about 12% of the population who was unemployed. Compared to the population, the best estimate I could find for 2019, 382.2 million people. So it's almost tripled since 1932. So when you see that number of 22 million, that's only going to be about 6% of the population. So we're not quite to that point. I know this is a very serious thing that we are talking about, but this isn't uncommon. This happened with the Great Depression, it's happening right now. But don't be too alarmed, don't make too many comparisons here in regards to the Great Depression. We're not quite to that point here. Now before Pearl Harbor, remember how I was talking about World War I? About how a lot of those fathers, their sons would be the ones who'd be impacted by World War II. That's why isolationism was a very prominent idea during the time leading up to our involvement in World War II. This would have been 1939 to 1941, basically when the Germans invaded Poland until Pearl Harbor. A lot of people were very adamant about not joining the war. We wanted to stay out of the affairs of Europe, out of the affairs of Asia, and really just focus on ourselves. We just experienced the Great Depression. We're starting to come out of it a bit. We didn't quite want to get to a point where this would hurt our economy again. We wanted to really build ourselves back up. So we were weary of sending our sons to war. You saw the rise of the America First Committee. There was actually a rally held in Madison Square Garden that was very much an America First type feel. Let's keep America first. There were some pro-fascist aspects to it, but that was not the overwhelming majority opinion there. I will say that this opinion quickly dissipated once Pearl Harbor happened. After Pearl Harbor happened, this whole idea of isolationism was out the window. We quickly switched to a very pro-America, pro-war attitude once we saw what could have happened to us. Now, before I really jump into Pearl Harbor itself, I do want to show you guys some different comics from Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss, during the very beginning of World War II, really focused on the America First Committee and also on Charles Lindbergh. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Charles Lindbergh, but he was a famous aviator. He also was very friendly with Nazi Germany, especially in the lead up to World War II. And Dr. Seuss spent a lot of his efforts really trying to make it very clear how bad these things were. I know this may be hard to see right now, but there is one over here on the left that talks about, and the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it really didn't matter. And so you see the America First sweatshirt here, reading to the children a book about Adolf the Wolf with a little swastika on the bind. Over here on the right, you see Charles Lindbergh flying off into the distance. It's smart to shop at Adolf's. All victories guaranteed. He wanted us to trade with Nazi Germany. Now, these images, I guess you could kind of compare them to today in regards to memes. A lot of memes you see right now are either pro the stay-at-home order, against the stay-at-home order, or indifferent. Dr. Seuss is expressing his opinion through his drawings, a lot like how we're expressing ours through social media right now. Now, Pearl Harbor, again, like I said, changed everything for the United States. This was something that we didn't believe would happen here. Kind of like how my generation, that was 9/11, we didn't believe that a terrorist attack like that could happen on our own soil. A lot like today, how a lot of us didn't believe that a public health pandemic on this level could happen here in the United States. This quote here is from the beginning of President Roosevelt's address to Congress on December 8th, 1941, where he says, "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." If you notice here on this image here, you actually see the USS Arizona burning. This day shocked Americans. We never believed this could happen, and especially in such a surprise manner. A lot of these guys were still asleep. It was early in the morning on Sundays, their day to sleep in. It was crazy. It really led to a mass mobilization of people. Now, you saw a lot of people signing up for the service. I have a friend, Dan Valerial, for those of you guys who are in the area. He talks about how at 13 years old, on the day after Pearl Harbor, he rushed down to the recruitment office to sign up. He was told he was too young, but to come back when he was 18. But a lot of 18 and older men were signing up for this. They wanted to defend their country. So this poster right here is a recruitment poster. It says he volunteered for submarine service. Now, something to keep in mind, you're on a submarine. You see how this guy right here has this cute girl that he's holding on to? You're not going to have any cute girls when you're stuck on a submarine with probably about 10 other guys. So these propaganda posters were designed to encourage you to do something, but it may not tell the whole truth. We're going to have a program coming up in a few weeks talking about propaganda posters, so stay tuned for that. There's so many great ones from World War II. Many of you guys may recognize Rosie over here. Rosie encouraged women to join the workforce, to go work in factories. So you had your men going overseas, you had your women leaving their homes and working in jobs that were typically reserved for men. Today, here in Virginia, we're seeing people who have retired from the medical field jump back in through our Virginia Medical Reserve Corps. They're volunteering their time and services in order to make sure that our people are well and that we don't overwhelm our hospitals. And so you're seeing different types of mobilization going on with World War II and today. Now, the next poll question I have before we talk about the role of students in World War II is, have you and your family been doing anything different to support others during the COVID-19 pandemic? This can include making masks or doing different things for our healthcare workers, things like that. So that should be popping up on your screen in just a second. Let us know. I'm curious. Have you guys been doing anything different? So, are we starting to get some responses in? Perfect. So we'll give it just a little bit more time and we'll dig in. And if you want to share some examples of what you're doing, feel free to put that within the chat feature. We'd love to hear what you guys are doing. Perfect. We'll see. Are we at a good point to share the results?
Yeah, so a really good point. Majority of 73% said yes.
Okay.
Only 6% said no, and then we have 19% unsure.
Okay. So it looks like most of us are doing something. I know I have bought donuts for healthcare workers. I've sent notes to my friends who are first responders, encouraging them. And it's kind of like back with World War II. We were doing things that we wouldn't typically do during the war in order to support the war effort. For students in particular, right here you see a group of students, including a Boy Scout. Side note, we do have a lunchbox lecture coming up on Thursday talking about Scouts Go to War with our Director of Education. So you'll learn a little bit more about what Scouts did during that time, both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. So students did many different things. School war efforts would include these knitting drives where you knit socks for soldiers. There would be scrap metal drives where any metal that you could spare would be sent to be turned into something else for our soldiers. You also saw playgrounds being turned into victory gardens for your neighborhood. For the older students, many of them would lie about their age or forge their parents' signature to join the military. You'll often hear about 15, 16, 17-year-olds who joined the military during World War II in order to serve their country. Many of them, if they did not join the military, could not join the military, or needed to stay and support their families, would drop out of high school because child labor laws were not enforced as much during this time and entered the workforce. This also resulted in a higher high school dropout rate during this period. So students were doing lots of different things. They were stepping up into greater responsibility to make sure that their families were taken care of and they were supporting the war. Now, we talked about the mobilization of people. Let's look a little bit at the mobilization of resources. So today we're seeing people using scrap fabric to make masks for our healthcare workers, first responders, even for their neighbors. During World War II, this propaganda poster here for the American Red Cross says, "Our boys need socks, knit your bit." So it was encouraging people to take your time, your spare time, make these things to support the war effort, make these things to support our health crisis that's going on. And you didn't just see it with these everyday items, you also saw it with the whole industrial complex. Today we're seeing technology groups not making those things, but making ventilators. You're seeing clothing companies make face masks. In World War II, like I said, you're seeing them switch their gears. If they made clothing or even pantyhose during World War II, they may make parachutes. So we're switching kind of how we operate during the war, changing up our resources. Now this leads to another question, an important question that both applies to today and back then. What is supply and demand? A few of you guys may know this. I know this is something you really focus on in your civics and economics class if you haven't had that yet. But supply is basically whatever you see at a store, you know, the number of items you have. The demand is, well, do people need this or really want this right now? Face masks 2 months ago may not have flown off the shelves. Toilet paper 2 months ago may not have flown off the shelves like it is right now. That's because the demand for it was not as high. So that's kind of that whole idea. It depends on whether you're able to get it restocked easily, and whether the public really needs it quite as much. So thinking about limited supplies in stores, today we all know this familiar picture. You walk down the aisle of the grocery store and you can't find toilet paper. There's typically a sign there that says limit 2 paper products per household. Thank you. In World War II, you have this young guy here handing over his ration book, which we'll talk about in a second, in order to purchase a can of vegetables. Things were limited back then. For us today, it's more of a commercial versus personal dilemma here. We're not going to shopping malls, we're not going to museums, we're not going to sporting events, so we're not using commercial toilet paper quite as much. But guess where we are? We're usually at home, so we're using more toilet paper at home. Companies have separate means of production for both of those, and so it's either they're having to completely switch how they do things. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing this limited supply in stores. Demand has gone up for personal and gone down for commercial. In World War II, it has more to do with trade routes, especially for sugar. That has to come across an ocean. You're not going to be really keen to send sugar and oil across an ocean right now, especially when the U-boats are in the Atlantic and you're fighting the Japanese in the Pacific. So it's going to be harder to get those items. Now, when it comes to canned foods, you really want to send your canned foods over to your soldiers, because they're going to last longer. And don't forget, we have to feed our soldiers, not just the people here at home during that time. So you're seeing different reasons for limited supplies, but you do see limited supplies in both. So kind of getting back to literally, I just answered this question. So why were there less of certain items then and now? Again, it comes to trade, it comes down to production as well. So rationing in the 1940s, remember the cute little boy who was handing over that ration book? Well, I have one here too. This is ration book number 4. These books were basically designed to ensure that everyone would get enough, whether it was a civilian or a soldier. You were issued these ration books and you had a certain number of stamps that you could use each month. So they have quite a few extra stamps actually. My favorite here is coffee. Very important, especially for today. So these ration books, you would need your ration stamps and you would need money in order to purchase items. If you only had ration stamps, you didn't have any money, you wouldn't be able to purchase it and vice versa. So this was a way to ensure that people weren't hoarding or taking too much of certain items. Now, question for you guys. It's gonna be our last poll question. What household item was rationed or allowed to purchase in very limited quantities during World War II? Was it gasoline? Was it shoes? Or was it food? So take your time. There is an option for all of the above. Do you think that may be it? So again, talk with your family and see what you guys think. Are you looking good with the results so far, Lindsay? That's pretty much everyone excited. Perfect. Well,
yeah. So
what's the answer?
we're looking at 9 people saying all of the above.
Okay.
5 just said food, and 2 said just gasoline. And
Okay.
we have 0 results for shoes.
Oh, I wish that shoes weren't rationed because I love shoes. I have way too many pairs of shoes. It actually was all of the above. All of these things were rations. Now, as our director of education pointed out earlier, not all food would be rationed at the same time. It was seasonal as well. But we'll talk more about that in a second. So let's have some fun here. It's gonna be like the Price is Right. I want you guys to try to guess what the prices were for these different items. And this is kind of a tease for next week's program. Next Monday at 1 o'clock, we're going to be doing a program called Shopping with Rations, which actually allows you guys to take your turn at planning a meal for a day for a family. Now, keep in mind the prices and the ration stamps, the amounts are based off of a Raleigh News and Observer article from, I think, 1941 or 1942. I may be wrong on that, but it was based off of Raleigh, North Carolina's prices and availability. So let's get started. So peanut butter, a jar of peanut butter was 25 cents and 16 stamps. Now, coffee here, everyone's favorite, was 24 cents a pound and 42 stamps. Coca-Cola here, 5 cents and 10 stamps. I've seen different things where Coca-Cola would have been up to about 40 stamps, depending on the availability of sugar. Now, sugar is going to be 31 cents and 80 ration stamps. Something to keep in mind, most families only had 40 ration stamps per person per month. So someone like myself during World War II who lives alone would not be able to purchase coffee like that because that would be my entire grocery budget for that month. So you would actually see folks reuse their coffee grounds. My grandmother, for example, grew up in the Great Depression, lived through World War II on the home front. She reused coffee grounds pretty much until the day she died. That was something she was so used to, never broke that habit. So you had to be very careful with shopping. You were very aware of how much things cost. You would share items like sugar with your neighbors. Now, another thing you would do to supplement, because for the most part, your ration stamps would be used for canned vegetables and canned fruit. So you could grow a victory garden In World War II, this photo here was taken from the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. They grew different types of vegetables and fruits for the public. It was really a resource for people who were in need to grab vegetables as they needed. Today, we're seeing victory gardens being grown by different museums, different organizations, food pantries, in order to give to those who are less fortunate than us. For example, our victory garden here at the National D-Day Memorial, we grow vegetables every single year and we donate them to a local food bank. And so one thing to know, another advertisement for an upcoming program, we're going to have a lecture on victory gardens coming up in a few weeks. I think it's May 7th. So tune in for that. I'll give you a little bit of history and also some tips for growing your own victory garden too. Now, another thing that was occurring during World War II was the first recycling movement. First major recycling movement for the modern era, I should say. So there were a lot of things that you were encouraged to send to the government and they would be repurposed for other things. So the first one we'll talk about are milkweed pods. I actually have one here with me today. It's just the shell, but you would pull out the inside of it. It's like a silky type deal, and it would be used for life vest. Now, I don't have a full-on life vest. I do have a life belt that would have been used with air, but you could actually, the filling for this would have been very buoyant. So the next piece is newspapers. So whenever you're done reading your newspaper, you could recycle it because recycled paper can be used for more paper. A lot of times it was used to make your ration stamp booklets like this. Ooh, our favorite pantyhose or stockings. If you guys were paying attention just a little bit ago, I might have said what these will be turned into. These are turned into parachutes. It would take over 2,000 pairs of these to make one parachute. It's pretty crazy to think about jumping out of a plane with these, actually. Now, ooh, my favorite, lipstick. So you would have your lipstick here. What does it kind of look like to you guys? What do you think? Kind of looks like a bullet. So these would actually be transformed into bullets. I have some right here. Not quite the same size, but you guys get the drift. So tires, rubber, could be transformed into gas masks. And I actually have one here inside of a rubber bag, which it probably would have been recycled into as well. Let's see if we can pull it up. There we go. You got your gas mask. And tires were actually rationed during the war as well. You had to have stamps in order to buy tires. Let's see. Ooh. Cooking greaves. Now, for those of you guys who watched our Disney Goes to War program, you guys know that cooking grease can have its glycerin pulled out to make explosive powder for our bombs and our bullets. Now, things like shovels, scrap metal, could be melted down and turned into other things such as grenades. So I have one of those here. It is not live. It has been demilitarized. So we were taking different things we found at home and repurposing it into things that could be used for the war effort. It really was an all hands on deck, whether you're an adult, whether you were a child, everyone was participating to make this happen. You would even hear at home about taking little bits of soap and putting them together to make another bar. You weren't just throwing things away or finding ways to reuse them, even if you didn't give them to the government to repurpose them for the war effort. Now, thinking about all of that, I know I can't cover everything about the Homefront in the 1940s in our short period of time for this program. But I do want to end on a quote from President Roosevelt in 1942. It is that there is one front and one battle where everyone in the United States, every man, woman, and child is in action and will be privileged to remain in action throughout this war. That front is right here at home in our daily lives and in our daily tasks. President Roosevelt understood the importance of the home front, about giving up your everyday lives to make sure that we won this, whether it was in Europe and Asia. We were sacrificing things for the common good, to make sure that Nazism was defeated, to make sure that Japan wouldn't keep taking over the rest of the world, to preserve our freedoms and those of other countries. So that meant maybe not going to school for a little bit, maybe doing scrap metal drives. It meant taking your free time to knit a pair of socks, kind of like what we're doing today. We're taking this time to really support others. We're staying at home to protect those who are more at risk, to keep our hospitals from being overwhelmed. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to open it up to questions from you guys. I know there may be a lot of questions about some of the different things we've talked about. You can put those inside of the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen. Click that, type your question in, and click submit. And Lindsay will start reading them to me in just a minute. Okay. So while we're waiting, I know that we're going to have some upcoming programs. Oh, I went a little too far there. I've already mentioned quite a few of these. We have Scouts Go to War. This is going to be on Thursday. It's going to be on Facebook Live at noon. Our Shopping with Rations, a more in-depth look at the rationing system and how that affected your everyday life. On Monday, April 27th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Our Director of Education is going to talk about the Battle of the Atlantic. That'll be on Thursday, April 30th at noon. And then, of course, Digging for Victory, talking about victory gardens, will be the following Thursday, May 7th. And we'll also talk about VE Day on VE Day, the 75th anniversary of it, on May 8th. So please stay tuned for more information about those programs.
All right, so it looks like we do have a few questions then.
Perfect.
So the first one from Isaac. Speaking of 9/11, do you think terrorism will slow down because of COVID-19?
I don't feel fully confident to be able to give an accurate answer for that. My opinion is probably to a certain degree. I know I did see a news article that said there were no school shootings for the first time since March 2002, this past March. So there may be some truth to that, but I can't provide a definite answer regarding that. But that's a great thing to be thinking about.
All right, so our second question, why do you think the propaganda lied? Or why did you think propaganda lied during the war?
I wouldn't say lied. I will tell you that when the submarinists got on leave, they had a little bit of fun and did find very cute girls at times. But it was a way to try to entice you to do something. So propaganda, really the purpose of it is to convince you one way or the other about an object or an action. So these recruitment posters were designed to make you want to sign up for the military. If you go back and watch our Disney Goes to War program, we looked at how Donald Duck went through a really easy recruitment test in order to join the military to show it's not that bad. So I wouldn't say they necessarily lied. They may stretch the truth a little bit, but propaganda was designed to convince you of something. And that typically for recruitment was that it wasn't that bad, that it was good. So.
All right. Why do gas masks look scary?
Why do gas masks look scary? That's a great question. And I will say the World War II gas masks look a little bit better than the World War I ones. The World War I ones really do freak me out. But the thing is they have to cover your entire face. And, you know, especially considering the lack of technology during this time. You had to get very creative with how you filtered the air. So it would usually be something right in the front. The eyes looked like bug eyes almost. But also you'd be able to see. And so it did look a little scary, mostly because it is covering your entire face, and you had to get creative with how to ventilate your mask to keep the gas from coming in, but also to keep you breathing as well. So it was scary, but it also saved your life. So that's one of those things there.
All right, and the next one, during this time period, were there anti-war protests put on by college students like during Vietnam?
There really weren't. You saw more anti-war protests before Pearl Harbor, but it really wasn't like Vietnam at all. It was more just being outspoken. JFK was actually a part of the America First Committee. As many of you know, he went on to serve in World War II. So a lot of people who were against the war, they weren't doing major protests like that. They really were just being very outspoken about their stance, but many of them signed up to help out as soon as Pearl Harbor happened. So that's a great question.
All right, and were maple products such as maple sugar and syrup rationed as well, since it was such sugar?
Maple syrup was rationed during the war, and it really just depended on the area. So for example, in like Vermont and Canada, probably wouldn't be rationed as much as it would be in Florida, because you would have to transport that from north to south. In areas where items are more easily accessible, easily made, you're not going to see as much rationing for them. So.
How many people in the war died from diseases in World War II?
Oh, I cannot answer that question with absolute certainty. I do encourage you to actually go and watch our program that our Director of Education, John Long, did on combat medics of World War II. It gives you a little bit of an idea of what that was like, especially in the battlefield. But we didn't see quite as many losses as we had in previous wars due to disease and infection because of improvements in healthcare by that point.
With so many young people joining the military, how did colleges and universities deal with less money coming in?
Oh, that's a great question, and that kind of hits to what's going on today a little bit too. I'm not quite sure exactly. I know they probably did reduce their workforce. I also know that the GI Bill came into effect after World War II. So you saw a surge of men going back to school afterwards. So it may have been a temporary decline, but we do know that colleges rebounded pretty quickly as a result of that.
Do you know approximately how many stamps were used for a loaf of bread?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I will tell you, if you watch our program next Monday at 1 o'clock, you'll find out a little bit more, and you'll be able to plan to see if you're able to make sandwiches or French toast or whatever you want to make.
All right, another question. Why do you think more people are unemployed now than in the Depression?
So just to go back a little bit, I won't be able to jump all the way back to that slide. I did say that there is more people now, but that's also because our population is 3 times the amount that it was during the Great Depression. So we have more people unemployed, but percentage-wise, we're not nearly to where it was during the Great Depression. Great question.
All right, and how many pounds did the equipment weigh for the soldiers?
The soldiers, well, their backpacks and all their equipment was somewhere between 80 to 100 pounds. So.
All right, since house repairs sometimes take metal and other materials they would need for the war, were people still able to do house repairs?
That's a fantastic question. I'm sure you got very resourceful as well. You may have found something that was laying around your house you could repurpose to make the repair. I'm sure there were still handymen who were at work. It may have cost a little bit more due to that supply and demand issue, but I'm sure they were able to work around it.
Who was the youngest person to join the military? How young could they join the military?
Maybe 14 or 15 years old. I don't know for sure. I've heard quite a few stories of 15-year-olds, but yeah, That's definitely something, if you're interested in, keep looking into.
Yeah, another one about joining the military. Did any women join the military during that time?
Absolutely. And we could talk about this for a long time. I love talking about women in World War II. Women were able to join the military, typically in reserve corps. They worked as WACs, they worked as WASPs, which meant they worked mostly in administrative roles during the war. They were in the military. It was still going to be men serving on the front lines for quite a few decades after World War II. Okay, and
two more. During the war, my great-grandpa worked as someone that walked through town at night and made sure people were in their homes by a certain time. Do you know anything about that type of job during World War II? He wore a uniform where he did this. Was there curfew?
So this would be the civilian defense. And so I don't know quite too much about that job, but I did get handed this helmet that they would have worn during that. I know there were curfews, especially in specific areas. You hear more about curfews, especially with England, in regards to blackouts, but we're also preserving electricity. Daylight savings time even goes back to World War II. So definitely a great question. Definitely something that we've actually talked about doing a program on as well. So stay tuned.
All right, let's only have two more. How many people have died to COVID compared to the Spanish flu right after World War I?
I do not have enough information to answer that question, but I encourage you to research that on your own.
All right, and then one more. How did they get wood for the grits on the guns?
The same way you would get wood now. You're chopping down trees. I mean, wood wasn't really rationed as much, especially considering the United States, especially the East Coast is as wooded as it is. So absolutely. Well,
and there is a question about the helmet.
Okay.
Do you know what does the triangle on the helmet mean?
It's just the logo for it. Each different, like the wax, the boss, so forth, they all have their own logos. So perfect. Well, that is all the time we have today. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, being engaged, interacting with us. It was great to hear what you guys are doing, where you guys are watching from. I encourage you, if you have any remaining questions, do some research or tune into our upcoming lectures. We're going to be diving in a bit more during these programs about these specific topics. You can learn more at our website, dday.org, or go to our Facebook page. You can find out more there. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Hopefully we'll see you guys again soon. Thank you.